A couple of weeks ago, when I went live for the first and so far only time, I stated that one of my goals for 2019, or at least what little remains of it, is to finish this accursed 2020 Democrat series, something that has proven to be much greater of an undertaking than I ever imagined possible. Today we're going to take out another one of the many candidates who have to be covered. And fortunately, because Mr. Bloomberg is running a half-assed campaign which doesn't include the first 4 states, I'm going to give him a half-assed coverage. After all, if he can't bother to run in all 50 states, I don't have to bother talking about his business career, his early life, or any of that shit. Let's just get right to Bloomberg's campaign itself, his prospects, and the obvious problems. First of all, he's not playing to win on any level. As I mentioned, he is not running in Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, or South Carolina. And you have to gain momentum in those states before you go into Super Tuesday to pick up any real number of delegates to win. There also is a problem of identity for Michael Bloomberg. Why is he running? What does he represent? What does he bring to the table that's not already there? If we're talking about people who are rich, there are already two multimillionaires in the race, Delaney and Yang. If we're talking about billionaires, there's already one of those. There's Tom Steyer. So, does he bring anything there? No. We're talking about business people. Well, all the people I just mentioned who are rich are business people or have business as part of the resume. So, that's not unique either. There are already candidates from New York in the race. Bill de Blasio, his successor as mayor, is already in the race, or at least was. Yang is from New York. Bernie was born in New York. Booker's from New Jersey, which is basically New York. So, again, what is new or interesting about Bloomberg? What does he bring to the table? I mean, I would mention issues, but he doesn't have any. If you've seen any of his ads are so generic that they could literally be about any candidate other than Bernie Sanders. If you put anyone else's face and name on them, it would seem like a real ad for that person. Bloomberg is selling nothing about himself, and he's also selling nothing specific or unique. His ads are generic AF. It reminds me of 2004 when Democratic genius strategist convinced John Kerry to eschew anything about himself that might be remotely interesting and run as the most generic Democrat he could possibly conjure. And of course he lost because the generic Democrat strategy is one of the stupidest things in all of political history. But Bloomberg is basically doing it now, and he's gotten up to 4 or 5% by running ads on TV. And running ads on TV in 2019 means that he's appealing to older, more affluent voters. A demographic, which is the key constituency for people like Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden to an extent, and any of the alternatives to Joe Biden who are on the right wing of the party. So what could hold Bloomberg back from going all the way? Well, one, the late entry is a problem. Even though he's the mayor of New York and New York has a major media market, it will be hard for him to explain himself to the public as a whole. Most people don't really know who he is. Even though he owns his own TV station and all that kind of stuff, the fact of the matter is most people don't know much about Bloomberg. Contrary to what people in the media often assume, most of us don't live in New York. Not only that, but he just, as I said, doesn't really have anything distinctive about himself that people would buy into. If people did look into his record, they'd see quickly that he's most famous for banning big gulps. Yeah, talk about addressing the real problems in the country. He also instituted stop and frisk in New York, which caused many young black men to go to jail for simply carrying things like marijuana. So those things will prevent him from getting anywhere in a primary. And if anything, he will get even less of the black vote than Pete Buttigieg, which is saying a hell of a lot. So he can't win outright. That's pretty much impossible, even if he were running a competent or decent campaign that wasn't just shitting money at the problem. He's spending $30 million in the Super Tuesday states on TV ads. That's his strategy, is just throwing money at the problem. But let's say these people see these ads. Maybe a few of them will be hooked because they like the idea of someone who's just a boring middle of the road guy. Maybe they think that a billionaire can beat a billionaire or some shit like that. If they actually look him up, and these are lifelong ardent Democrats, they'd probably be horrified to know that Michael Bloomberg was an ardent supporter of George W. Bush, the war criminal who gave us the Patriot Act, the surveillance state, and the Bush tax cuts. Not to mention the Great Recession, the housing crisis, etc. So, if people actually do any research into Bloomberg at all, it's not going to be good. So he has no real growth potential beyond what he's at right now. And whatever growth potential he gets, by the way, will come at the expense of people who are his allies in the party. So he is ultimately undermining all of the people like Buttigieg and, say, the recent entry of Deval Patrick, people like that. He's taken the oxygen out of the room for the people on his side, the centrists in the race. So what he's trying to do, I think it's very clear, is he's part of what I've feared all along, that the establishment Democrats are going to go for a brokered convention. The other great piece of evidence in favor of that is not only the sheer number of candidates who are generic centrist, but also that Barack Obama has let it be known that he will do everything in his power to stop Bernie Sanders from winning the nomination. So between that and then the entry of Michael Bloomberg, who's just running a lazy-ass campaign, throwing ads that he made in 5 minutes up on TV, it makes me think that they're trying to win as many delegates for centrism as they can, and then go to the convention, broker it in the second round, and then appoint someone who's hopefully electable. But the problem is, if you broker the convention and you fuck over Bernie Sanders, that is going to depress turnout massively, and you basically might as well just hand Trump a second term, because there's no point in going through the motions if you rig the primary. At any rate, though, here's what I think will actually happen due to the entry of Michael Bloomberg. He and Steyer right now are dividing these states among themselves. Steyer will run in the first 4 states, try to peel off a few delegates, then probably fade away. Bloomberg will then pick up the slack in the Super Tuesday states and try to peel off some delegates. The problem is this. Candidates build momentum in those early states and then carry it over in the Super Tuesday and beyond. So for Michael Bloomberg, as someone who will not be placing at all in any of those 4 states, he's not going to have any momentum, and he will not be seen as electable or viable, and people will kind of see that his campaign is somewhat gimmicky, last minute, half-assed, and that it's clearly somewhat tricky. There's something going on there. Here's who he will help and hurt. As I mentioned, he will take oxygen out of the room for the centrists in the race. That 4 to 5% that he has right now in the national polls could be going to a person like Buttigieg or Booker or Klobuchar. But instead, they've decided to put their hopes in Michael Bloomberg. Now, most likely he will lose that support over time, but a lot of these candidates need support now to get themselves qualified for the next debate, to make sure that they are able to raise funds because they appear viable, etc. Bloomberg has basically deprived them of support that they might otherwise get. So, how about Elizabeth Warren? She's in a tricky spot right now. If we look at the dynamics of the 2012 and 2016 Republican fields, which were also crowded, kind of like this one, what we notice is that candidates might surge unexpectedly. Michelle Bachmann and Herman Cain back in 2012 both made surges, and both of them then fell off and didn't go anywhere. Rick Santorum also made a strong run in 2012, but that's a little different. That came a little later. So what I've noticed in these kind of large fields is that if someone makes a surge out of nowhere, and then that surge falls apart and they fall back to the pack, they're not going to leave the pack ever again. For Warren, she has already peaked and then fallen, and most likely she's not going to make a comeback. The only thing that could help her, but probably won't, is that Harris left the race. The reason I say it is because Warren's support in part comes from people who just want a woman president, and those are the same kind of people who would support Harris. So she might have gotten a boost from Harris, but some of those people will be peeled off by Bloomberg. Speaking of Kamala Harris, who just dropped out, part of the reason why she did drop out is because Bloomberg entered, and some of her supporters, including her campaign manager, jump ship. So that's always a good sign. I think for Kamala, he ultimately did her a favor by taking her out behind the barn, however, because her campaign was so fucked. It allows her to save face by not having to go into these states and pretend she has a chance and getting 2% of the vote. So really, if anything, she should be thanking Michael Bloomberg. But make no mistake about it, it was his entry into the race that really prevented her from continuing on. As for the other recent entry, Deval Patrick, he might have made a small impact, but look, with Bloomberg entering with his kind of clout and $30 million ad buy, yeah, Deval Patrick is guaranteed to not go anywhere. Here's what I think will happen. There will be two beneficiaries of Bloomberg's entry into the race. One, progressive priorities in general. Bloomberg will get up on the stage. I assume he'll try to get into the debate somehow, and he'll manage to do it just like Steyer did by using money. And Bloomberg is an unappealing, uncharismatic, condescending asshole. What he'll do is go up on stage and explain to people in the most dickish way possible why they can't have and do not deserve things like Medicare for all. What that will do is drive up support for those programs. There are other neoliberal bullshit artists like even John Delaney, Amy Klobuchar, Pete Buttigieg. These people are actually somewhat effective propagandists. They fearmonger about the cost of things and about taking your doctor away or taking away your choice in healthcare, etc., etc. And they haven't made that big of a dent in the grand scheme of things, despite being backed up by the mainstream media at every turn. If Bloomberg comes out and says the same stuff as a member of the billionaire and donor class himself, he will simply give up the game. These other people can pretend that they are representing good public policy and they just have the best interest of the public in mind, or that they have political experience and therefore they know what is feasible. Bloomberg will just come out and say, I'm a billionaire, I fund this party, I used to fund the Republican Party, and what I say goes. If you don't like it, that's too damn bad. He'll just say it, or at least use a tone that will imply it and make it very clear that that's what he thinks. This will help progressive priorities immensely. This will undo a lot of the damage that Pete Buttigieg has done. Now, as for the candidate who will benefit from Michael Bloomberg's candidacy, I have no doubt. It is Bernie Sanders. For Bernie, his whole campaign has lacked one thing. Well, a couple things, but one main thing. And that is a great foil. In 2016, he had a foil in Hillary Clinton. A lot of people supported Bernie, not so much because of his ideas, just because they hated Hillary. This year, he's lacked that. His ideas have had to carry him all the way. And this plethora of candidates has prevented him from forming a major coalition thus far. Elizabeth Warren has also been an obstacle as she split off a large percentage of the progressive vote. However, with Warren falling, and with Biden slipping ever deeper into dementia, well, his opportunity has arrived. So then Bloomberg enters, and in his mind, he's preventing Bernie from getting the nomination. However, the exact opposite is going to happen. Bloomberg is the literal personification of everything that Bernie Sanders is fighting against. Bloomberg is the perfect foil for Bernie Sanders. He is an old, cranky, condescending asshole who wants to take away things from people. He was a Republican up until maybe, 10 years ago at the most recent, and he only switched because it would be convenient to run for mayor of New York as an independent, and then he became a Democrat because his old business rival Trump became president. So he's not really much of a Democrat. His views are not really in line with the Democratic Party if you go back before he ran for president. He exposes the game. When people talk about how there are two wings of a corporate party, Michael Bloomberg is one of the reasons why that is the case. He has funded the corporate wings of both parties. He went away from the Republicans precisely because they became a little bit more populist. And he is determined to make the Democratic Party into the party of George W. Bush, basically what the Republicans were a mere decade ago. Bernie Sanders can easily attack him. Bernie's been a little reluctant to go on the offensive. Well, Bloomberg will force him. Not only because it's extremely easy and because there's no reason to have any sort of sympathy for Bloomberg, But Bloomberg will be like a John Hickenlooper or John Delaney in that if he gets on the debate stage, he's going to go directly after Bernie, and he won't give a fuck. That will force Bernie to counterpunch, and Bernie will be able to pick him apart. Bloomberg made $50+ billion. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that that came with extensive human exploitation. Bloomberg has a mayor as New York City. There were racial issues, among other problems. Not to mention gentrification. Other things that Bernie can campaign on that will endear him even more to constituencies that he has been trying to build up on, such as any community of color, for instance. So, this is the perfect opportunity for Bernie Sanders. He's already building momentum, his fundraising remains strong, and now a literal billionaire who is an ardent anti-progressive has emerged from the shadows to try to stop him. Tom Steyer wasn't as effective as a foil because he tries to pretend to be progressive, and on a few issues he actually is. Bloomberg isn't progressive in the least, so he is a much easier target. Bernie literally could not ask for a better foil. And if this isn't enough to propel him to the top, well, nothing is, I guess. Until next time, I'm Thersites the Historian. Tomorrow we will talk about Pete Buttigieg, another really shitty centrist, but at least one who had the decency to compete in all 50 states and announce his candidacy at a reasonable time.